Here we are in the very middle of Dante's Purgatory. And as we move up the terraces of Purgatory, we're ascending through the purgation of the 7 deadly sins in declining order of importance. So it's lighter as you go higher. The weight that the suffering souls bear becomes lighter. And Dante himself, he's got these 7 P's referring to sins. And each P gets removed as he moves upward. So we've gone through the terraces of pride and envy and wrath. And we're now in an interesting terrace called the Terrace of Sloth. And sloth is kind of one of those 7 deadly sins that we are like, why is it even a deadly sin? I mean, what's the big deal about sloth? Isn't sloth basically the kind of inactive, recline on your couch, have some popcorn, watch TV all day, be a little bit of a bum? What's wrong with that? I mean, that may not be the most admirable thing in the world, and maybe it's even a vice if you make a habit of it, but why is it one of the 7 deadly sins? Can't you think of other things that are sort of more deadly? And Dante's view is that that's because you don't understand what sloth is and what it means. And we, as we go through with Dante, we find in the Terrace of Sloth some examples of sloth, and some of them are historical. I want to focus on just one, and that is the sloth, this is taken from the Bible, of the Israelites crossing the desert. And essentially the way Dante portrays it is that the Israelites kind of took their time. They were in no urgent hurry to get to the promised land. In fact, it took them years and years, 40 years of dawdling. And this was even after the Lord opens up the Red Sea so that they can escape from Egypt. But their punishment, and they had an earthly punishment for that. In fact, in the Old Testament, a lot of punishments for sins are delivered, not necessarily in the next life, but right here in this life. And their punishment is that a lot of them were not able to reach the promised land. Only their children did. So let's think about sloth in this case. The sloth here is not mere inactivity. It is not doing the thing that you are supposed to be doing. So sloth here means not focusing on the necessary project at hand, and instead doing either nothing or doing something else. Now, for Dante, sloth is loving the wrong thing. And this may seem like a very odd thing to say, but let me try to clarify it this way. Let's say, for example, that I have or you have a very serious problem in your family. It could be a problem of the relationship of a husband and a wife. It could be a problem where, let's say, the kids are on their way to some kind of disaster. And let's say that you don't want to deal with that problem. In fact, it's too difficult to deal with, or you don't have the heart for it. And so what do? You channel your energy into something totally different. You say, okay, well, listen, I'm just going to redouble my efforts at work. I'm going to become a complete workaholic. I'll be gone from 7 in the morning till 10 at night. And so in a modern sense, people will say, well, you can't accuse that guy of sloth because look at him. I mean, he's working so hard. He never seems to stop. He's going a mile a minute and so on. But from Dante's point of view, that is sloth. Why? Because sloth isn't the fact that you aren't doing anything. Sloth is that you aren't doing the thing that you ought to be doing. And if you're doing something else, even if you're doing it vigorously and with tremendous energy, you are, in fact, guilty of sloth because you are neglecting your, in a sense, divine assignment. You're neglecting your important duties. Now, Dante, as he goes through the Terrace of Sloth, you find that these pilgrims, their strength has ebbed from them. And this is, again, how Dante shows that the opposite of sloth is focused activity. And for Dante, focused activity is related to love. And this may seem like a a strange thing to say. But Dante looks at love not simply as, you are in love, but love is really what you choose. People, you can always tell what somebody loves by what it is that they're choosing to do. And moreover, how is it that they are choosing to be? This is critical because sometimes when we think about morality, we think about it in very narrow terms. It's a list of do's and don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that, mainly don'ts. And if you don't do those things, supposedly you're a moral person. But for Dante, morality has a much wider scope. It involves not only what it is good to do and not to do, but it is how it is good to be and what it is good to love. So if someone is spending all their time on X, that's a clue that that's what they care about. That's where their energy is devoted. That's where their efforts are deployed. And so by their actions, it kind of illuminates, well, look, that's the thing that these people love to do. And when they have a chance to do something, that's where their energy goes. And so remember we had talked in the Terrace of, in these important cantos, that Dante began with a discussion of free will, and he affirmed the importance of free will. In fact, think of it, you wouldn't need inferno, purgatory, or paradise if there was no moral responsibility. If their fault was in their stars or somehow in their genetic code, Dante's point is no, those things might affect you, but in the end, you do have free choice. And here, Dante is applying that principle and saying that the things that we love, it's not because we fell in love. It's not because some Cupid shot an arrow. It's because we chose. This is the thing that we want to focus on. And Dante is not here thinking merely about the people that we are in love with, but he's thinking just about everything that we choose. Everything that we choose. If I decide I've got a weekend, I'm going to spend it reading a book. Well, that shows you I've got a love of reading and of learning. Or I'm going to spend it playing video games. Well, that shows you that's what you love. That's real. And what you love is a window into what your choices are and what you are. Here's Debbie. She's like, oh, Dinesh, I'm now going to take these theories that you have speaking in a very objective academic way about and apply them to you. Isn't it true that right after you finish eating dinner, you suddenly strike up a game of chess where you're playing some guy in Norway and you're on the time and you're like, honey, wait, don't interrupt me. I'm trying to beat this guy from Finland, a guy you don't even know, by the way. So Debbie's like, interesting. What are you going to tell Peter at the gates of paradise when this issue comes up, Dinesh? So yes, this. I think Dante would have somewhat of the same take, and it's very important in this poem to apply what we see and learn not just to others but also to ourselves. And Dante does that in the Circle of Pride. He turns the mirror on himself and he says, "Well, how do I square in here?" And I think Dante would say that the time that he's spending in exile is not devoted to this great poem, to writing the Divine Comedy, to telling about his journey, you may say, through the afterlife. Time spent doing other stuff. If it's not necessary, and if it's not part of, you can say, his assigned duties, then that too becomes an example of sloth.